On a quiet Friday in April 2026, a new subdomain went live on the Department of Defense website, war.gov/UFO. A URL that would have seemed unthinkable 5 years ago began hosting declassified UAP encounter reports. No press conference, no Rose Garden announcement, just documents appearing in batches under the authority of something called the PERSU Directive, the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters. Within weeks, 3 separate tranches of material had been released, and yet the most important question wasn't what they contained. It was what controls the pipeline and whether anyone can actually force it to keep flowing. PERSU is an executive directive, not a statute. That distinction matters enormously. It establishes a rolling declassification framework, meaning documents are reviewed and released in successive waves, rather than dumped all at once or held to a single statutory deadline. The directive reportedly designates the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence as co-gatekeepers, with a dedicated disclosure review board conducting classification assessments before each tranche. The President retains final authority over release timing. This architecture gives the executive branch enormous discretion. Supporters call it pragmatic, a system that protects sources and methods while maintaining momentum. Critics see something else, a valve that can be tightened at any time by anyone sitting in the Oval Office. The first tranche, released in early May 2026, consisted primarily of military encounter reports from 2004 through 2015, sensor data summaries, pilot debriefs, and radar track analyses. Much of it corroborated material previously leaked or discussed in congressional testimony. Tranche 2, later that month, included intelligence community assessments of foreign government UAP programs, notably an alleged DIA analysis of retrieved materials. Tranche 3, in mid-June, was the most contested, a set of formerly compartmented reports referencing reverse engineering efforts, though with heavy redactions. Each release landed on war.gov/UFO with minimal metadata and no accompanying analysis. The documents simply appeared. The JFK Records Act of 1992 offers an instructive contrast. It set a hard 25-year deadline, later extended, after which all assassination-related records were presumed releasable unless agencies could justify continued withholding to a review board. PERSU has no equivalent mechanism. There is no fixed 2026 end date, no statutory presumption of release, no independent review board with subpoena power. Rolling declassification in practice means the executive branch decides the pace, the volume, and the stopping point. If a future administration decides to halt releases, the legal barriers to doing so are minimal.
The question is whether this represents a deliberate design choice, maintaining flexibility, or a structural vulnerability that Congress needs to close. The UAP Disclosure Act, championed by Senators Schumer, Rounds, and Gillibrand, took a fundamentally different approach. Building on the framework first proposed in 2023 and refined through 2 legislative cycles, the act, as passed in late 2025, established a presidentially appointed review board with authority to compel agency compliance. It created a legal presumption that UAP records should be disclosed. It set enforceable timelines. PERSU operates alongside this statute, but the relationship is ambiguous. The executive directive doesn't reference the Disclosure Act's review board. The Disclosure Act doesn't explicitly govern executive-initiated releases like PERSU's tranches. They are parallel tracks, and no one has clearly established which takes precedence when they conflict. David Grusch's July 2023 congressional testimony catalyzed demands for UAP-specific whistleblower protections. The proposed UAP Whistleblower Protection Act, currently moving through committee, would extend legal safe harbor to individuals disclosing information about UAP programs to Congress or designated inspectors general, even if that information is classified. PERSU's scope creates a tension here. If an individual possesses knowledge of documents that should fall within PERSU's rolling disclosure but are being withheld, their options remain limited without enacted whistleblower protections. PERSU doesn't create a right for insiders to report suppression. It is a top-down mechanism. The Whistleblower Act would provide the bottom-up pressure that PERSU, by design, lacks. Follow the architecture and the choke points become clear. The Disclosure Review Board conducts classification reviews, but its members serve at the pleasure of the Secretary of Defense and the DNI. Its recommendations are advisory. The President can override in either direction, accelerating or halting releases. War.gov/UFO functions purely as a distribution endpoint, not a decision-making body. No Inspector General has oversight of the pipeline. No congressional committee has been granted real-time visibility into what's being reviewed versus what's being held back.
The absence of enforceable declassification triggers means that the current pace of releases reflect political will, not legal obligation. Political will is by nature temporary. Former intelligence community officials familiar with the directive's drafting have suggested the open-ended timeline was intentional, an acknowledgement that premature release of certain technical details could compromise national security or intelligence relationships. That argument has merit, but it also conveniently ensures that no future administration is legally bound to continue what this one started.
The Disclosure Act's review board could theoretically fill this gap, compelling release of records that pursues gatekeepers choose to withhold. Whether those two systems will cooperate or collide remains one of the most consequential unanswered questions in the disclosure landscape. 3 tranches have been released. There is no public schedule for a 4th. The Whistleblower Protection Act has not yet reached a floor vote. The Disclosure Act's review board is still being constituted. Pursue gave the public a door, but the hinges are controlled entirely from inside. The architecture of disclosure right now is a system of executive discretion layered over statutory frameworks that have not yet been tested. Whether that architecture holds depends on sustained congressional pressure, an engaged public, and the willingness of insiders to use whatever legal protections eventually materialize. The documents on war.gov/UFO are real. The question is whether they represent the beginning of a process or the extent of one.